Okay, welcoming Melissa to the pod. Melissa, let's just get right into it. Where does this podcast find you?
So I am currently in my apartment in Ann Arbor. It's a Monday. I don't have classes until later in the afternoon. And I like to do work from home. I have my comfortable little setup. I have a standing desk and everything. So yeah, you're finding me in my home right now.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. A lot of great questions today, a lot of things I want to ask you about, but I figured we could maybe start a little bit at the beginning and kind of learn a little bit more about your backstory. I just wanted to start off by asking a little bit about how you grew up and maybe a little bit about your family life and what that kind of looked like. And that can maybe start the story of how things led to today for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll try to keep it brief because I'm an Italian and I like to talk. So I grew up in the suburbs of New York. I grew up in Westchester County, a small little town called Somers. A lot of people don't really know about Somers because they think of the lower Westchester towns like Scarsdale, Harrison, Rye, whatever. But I grew up in the very, very last town of Westchester County, about 2 hours outside the city. And I'm a first gen college student. Neither of my parents went to college. My mom is actually a first gen American. Both of her parents came over here from Europe. My grandma being from Germany, my grandpa from Italy. My grandpa was the only one that came over from his family. So we have a ton of family still in Italy, which is really exciting. And I'm not the best at speaking Italian, but luckily for WhatsApp, there's like translation that you could do. Very Italian family. And my grandma was basically assimilated into the Italian culture when she and my grandpa married. So for all intents and purposes, I was raised as an Italian, like full with full force growing up. My dad is fully Italian. He's Sicilian, but he's third generation, I want to say. But yes, it's just me, and my sister. My parents got divorced when I was in high school, so I spent the second part of high school just living with my mom. I do still have a really good relationship with both my parents, which I'm very fortunate about. But yeah, I played sports from a very young age. I was a very highly energetic kid. And I was the first of the two girls, just me and my sister. She's younger. And so my parents didn't know how to control my energy. So they just threw me into sports. Apparently, I was a very pleasant child, but I just wouldn't sit still. And my nickname when I was little was Hurricane Melissa. So that was just me going into every room and wanting to play and, move things around and whatever. So got into soccer pretty early on, probably around like 5 years old, kindergarten, whenever ASO starts or AYSO, depending on what part of the country you're in. And kind of never looked back, really just stuck with sports. I loved it. I was like naturally athletic. And like I said, I had a lot of energy. So for me, it worked out really well.
I feel like I'm gonna have to rename this episode Hurricane Melissa now after hearing that nickname because meaning that if that's the energy you're describing, like I think that's kind of a perfect background to understand your energy. And even from our conversations offline so far, like I could see how excited and meaningful you are about the things that you pursue. You mentioned kind of getting into sports and to kind of channel a lot of your energy and the things that you enjoy doing. Was your idea always to play sports in university? And maybe I guess kind of take us through how you got to NYU for your first degree, at least.
Because neither of my parents went to college, my dad knew how important it was to get us, me and my sister, to college. And he had coworkers in his job who had kids that were a couple of years older and had gone through the college application process and everything like that. So some of them had played college sports. And he learned really early on that, being a college athlete could help you get into school. Obviously, there's the scholarship piece of it as well, but beyond just scholarship, it could help you get admissions to a school that's like very competitive to get into. And so my dad's thing, once he realized like they never pushed me, they absolutely never pushed me to play sports. I loved playing sports. I mean, of course, there were times I'm like, I don't want to go to practice, but I loved playing sports. But once I think like my parents realized in high school that like I was talented enough to play in college. I made varsity as a freshman and all that stuff. And then I started to get like, looks from college coaches. And I think that's when my dad really was kind of like, look, like, I think it's a really good idea if you at least use it to get to school. And he always said, I don't care if you quit on day 2, but use it to get into school because it might give you the edge that, you might need in a particular application process. And there was a time where I like wasn't sure if I wanted to play in college, which is so silly, like looking back on it, because I don't know what I would have done with my life if I didn't play soccer through all 4 years. But, I was also very social. And so I was like, do I want to have like a typical college experience of like socializing and, going out and things like that? And I think that's kind of where D3 really fell into the best of both worlds, where I was able to play my college sport, play at a high level, but then also have the benefits of, I had like a relatively normal off season of like only practicing a couple days a week. I was able to study abroad. I got to kind of get the best of all worlds. But yeah, so I think that, that's kind of what, and honestly, like I thought I was going to be ready to be done playing when college was over, but I was really sad to leave it. So, that's why I'm saying I'm looking back thinking I might not, I was like at one point considering not playing. And now I'm like, oh my God, I like miss it so much. So, and my sister, she went, like I said, the other route. She was Division 1 and played professionally and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, like sports were just a very big part of my identity and my life and who I am as a person. And, I could talk for days about all the lessons I've learned from playing sports. I had two really serious injuries in college that, tore an ACL, broke a leg, both had to have surgeries for. So I think that, I am who I am because of my sport and I wouldn't change anything for the world.
It's always interesting to speak to college athletes and also like to kind of look back on that experience and to try to understand the lessons that you learned, let's say, on and off the field and how it kind of impacted and shaped, different things later on in your career, and also in your personal life. What were some things for you that you kind of look back on that time, being on the field at NYU and think kind of to your career journey so far today, and also just like off the field things that maybe you deal with on a daily basis, things that you think kind of impacted and shaped your life, lessons that maybe you learned with certain teammates, certain coaches, and you mentioned the injuries, like maybe that's something specifically that really kind of drove a certain mindset for you.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, and like I'll be a little vulnerable here. I was really arrogant when I started college. I'm not gonna lie. I knew I was a good soccer player. I could have played Division 1 if I wanted to. I had Division 1 offers that I declined to go to NYU. And I kind of came in a little cocky. And I think that attitude was the wrong approach. And I think I got humbled really quickly because I tore my ACL my freshman year. And so part of me thinks like, yeah, that sucked. Like I like don't wish that upon anybody, but I think I needed it. I think I needed it to bring me back down to reality and be like, okay, wait, Melissa, you're not invincible. Like you do have weaknesses. Now you're gonna have to come back from this pretty serious injury if you want to play for the next 3 years. So that was really, really humbling. And I was very lucky that I had, teammates and coaches that supported me throughout the whole rehab process and everything and also held me accountable. Like, I remember there was one time my sophomore year where I went out the night before a practice. It was my birthday. I got hammered and I was super hungover at practice. And my coach called me out. She's like, "You reek of tequila. Like, what's going on here? Like, you can't be doing this." And so I was like, it was just one of those things that you're like, you're young and you just think you can get away with everything. And, being held accountable in those situations. And I do think, like I said, the injuries really, really humbled me. And I needed that. And like, I am like, again, don't wish that upon anybody. But at the same time, like, I'm glad I had to go through those experiences because it really was a stark reminder. If I don't take things seriously, like everything can change in a heartbeat. Fun fact about my two injuries, both those are the only two like serious injuries I've really had ever. They both happened on the same field against the same team. And that was Wash U in St. Louis. It's the only two times I've ever been to St. Louis. I told myself I'm never going back to St. Louis because both times I went, I've left on a plane with like, surgery booked for me. So no more St. Louis for me. But, having to overcome the adversity of injuries and still be there for my team, especially my junior year when I broke my leg. So yeah, freshman year ACL, junior year leg. And when I was a junior, I was a captain. And to still be there for my team and be supportive of them as they were going into postseason when like all I wanted to do was be on the field with them and I couldn't be there, that was, it was a big learning lesson of how I can still be a leader, how can still support my team even when I'm not physically on the field with them. So, I kind of think of it and when people hear I had these like two serious injuries, they're like, "Did you quit?" I'm like, "No, I played all 4 years." Like, I think I still have some records at NYU athletics as well. And so like, I try to use that whenever I am faced with a challenge. I'm like, if I can get through that stuff, like I can bounce back from anything. And so I don't really shy away from, the roadblocks or any adversity that kind of comes my way. I'm just kind of like, all right, this is the situation. Now we got to find a way around it and, we'll get to the other side.
I really like that story that you speak about when you get injured and still having to step up as a captain for your team and kind of, making sure you look out for the rest of the team and you support your team in the right way. I actually think that can also be a great example for like everyday things in life and especially even in the professional setting of like what it means to be a good teammate. And I think that so many people sometimes forget that, obviously you want to perform well in whatever role you're in, but the importance of like supporting other people and helping other people and just being someone that they want to play with and be in the same room with is so important. I was wondering if you just want to speak on that for a minute of like how important it is to be a good teammate in the workforce, on and off the field, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously something that, some people are like, oh, you're born to be a leader. I think it's more of a learned behavior. I think that anybody can be a leader if they let themselves be vulnerable and learn from experiences like that, experiences that make them uncomfortable. I think one of the biggest things, in addition of to being sidelined when I was a captain as a junior. At a school like NYU, you have people from all over the place. Like we had girls on our team from Germany. We had people from Texas and Oklahoma and California when my whole life I was just used to playing with people in the tri-state area. And so you get exposure to such different personalities and different styles and different people that you inherently have to learn how to work with those different people. And like, there's like a ton of studies about how like the best leaders are able to adapt their leadership styles to individual people because, a message that is very straightforward and blunt might work really well with one person, but it might not hit with the next person. And so getting to learn the people around you and really understand how they operate. I think that was a skill that I like very much learned throughout my time at NYU. I was not perfect at it. I'm still not perfect at it, but I was definitely not good at it coming into it because I was very used to being around the same kind of person that was relatively similar to me. And then I'm put on the field with people whose English is not their first language. And so I'm like, now I got to like figure out a way to communicate, in that context. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned just in general about college sports, but I think the best leaders are the ones who are willing to learn and adapt, and understand that they're not, they don't have all the answers and they have to listen and kind of really take a step back and observe in order to become a more effective leader. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's immediately what came to mind.
We're in the NFL offseason now. So I guess that's a great lead into talking a little bit about your journey in the NFL. Maybe you could kind of tell us, did that happen right after NYU? How did you get to the NFL? Was it always something that you kind of envisioned for yourself? So would love to kind of hear a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, sure. And I think this works really well coming after college sports because I didn't know what I wanted to do. Again, having two parents who did not go to college, like I didn't have a blueprint or like guidelines to really follow. And I was also the oldest sibling. So it's not like I had like my older sister or my older brother to just like be like, oh, what did they do? I was kind of like paving my own path. And honestly, like I do give my dad a lot of credit. He tried to expose me to as much as possible because he knew what he didn't know. And so he wanted me to learn from people who have taken different paths or could give me a different perspective. And I remember when I was being recruited for soccer, my dad had mentioned he knew this guy whose daughter worked at the NBA. And that was the first time I must have been like a sophomore or junior in high school at this point. And that was the first time in my life that it ever occurred to me that there were jobs at like leagues. Like, I don't know why I just never thought that, like, I just thought the league was the league and then like the players were playing and like and the teams were their teams. I never envisioned like, oh, there is a league office that people actually go to and work at every day. And so that was kind of the first exposure that I had to like a career in sports. And then when I was getting recruited for soccer, I would express that interest in working in sports to the coaches or the schools that I was looking at. And NYU was the only school that had a sports management program, which I didn't know was a thing. I was going to apply to just the business schools at all these places. And then when, my coach at NYU was like, we have like a program for sports management. I was like, wait, that sounds like it's what I should do. So that's the route that I went. And again, I wasn't even really sure what I wanted to do on the back end of it. I just knew I loved sports. I wasn't going to be an athlete forever. So how can I kind of bridge the two together? And I loved the idea of working in a corporate office. I know people are probably going to say I'm crazy for that, but I really loved this. Maybe this is a first gen thing. I wanted to dress up and go to the office and, talk on the phone and like all that stuff. Like, I don't know why that excited me. So over the course of my 4 years at NYU, my degree had a requirement for internship hours. You needed to work a certain amount of internship hours in order to be eligible to graduate. And as a Division III athlete, I also had the opportunity to work during school. So I really wouldn't work during the season, but I was able to work in the off season. I was able to work over the summers. So I just started trying shit, for lack of a better term. I didn't know where to start. And I just was like, I had no real like work experience besides like babysitting from high school. So I just started like whatever opportunities came my way. I was like, yes, I don't even know what this means, but I'm going to try it. I'm going to figure it out. And so that led me to I had 4 different internships. I had 2 different jobs. I worked as a tutor. I worked in retail at Nike. I worked for nonprofits. I worked at a startup. I then worked for New York Roadrunners for a summer. I worked at ESPN my second semester, senior year. And so, like, I was able to really expose myself to a bunch of different avenues of what working in sports could actually mean. And that was also a benefit of being in New York City because I could do that stuff while I was still taking classes. But yeah, I like realized probably between my junior and my senior year that I wanted to actually work at a league office. I knew now what that meant. And at the end of my internship with New York Roadrunners, and this is a message to anybody who's networking to do research on who they're talking to, the CEO of New York Roadrunners did exit interviews with the interns. And that was really nice. I mean, there was only 5 of us, but he still didn't have to do that. And so he asked me, like, what do you want to do after you graduate? And I was like, I think I want to work at the NFL. Like, I would love to work at a league office. And like the NFL is like the pinnacle professional sport in the United States. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. And he's like, oh, I worked at the NFL for 15 years. And I was like, that's perfect. And I like wish I would have known that coming into it. But long story short, he told me to apply to this entry level role for college graduates. He wrote me a letter of recommendation for it, which is 100% why I think I got the interview in the first place. Went through the whole interview process, got to the final round. I interviewed in person for the final round. I had to give a pitch to a panel of executives on a business idea on how the NFL could grow their business. This was in person. It was the week of my finals, my senior year. And then I didn't hear back for 2 months. And I found out I did not get the job. And I was super bummed about that because I was like, I thought I killed it. I had the letter of rec. Like, I thought, like, final round, like, I thought it was in the bag. But, obviously a little disappointing. But kind of going back to my injury stories, I'm like, just, all right, this is what it is. We're just going to have to move forward and like figure something else out. So, long story short, I ended up just like randomly applying to a bunch of different places through my school's career site, ended up getting a job offer from the NHL in IT, which is ridiculous because I don't have any IT background or any IT interest, but I wasn't like fixing people's computers, but I was like helping organize their digital assets. I took that. I was like, all right, it's a professional league. I don't want to work in IT forever, but let's just run with this and see where it goes. So I worked there. I will say I graduated without a job. I didn't get this job offer from the NHL until 3 weeks after I graduated. I had a little fun employment stint, but I refused to move home. I was like, I'm not moving home. I'm not getting comfortable at home. I'm going to stay in the city until I find something. And luckily, like something came through. I was working in that job for about 2.5 months, I want to say. And then end of August, the NHL actually reached back out to me and they were like, hey, we know that, the last position didn't work out, but you really impressed the people that interviewed you. And there's another position that's open that we think you'd be a good fit for if you're interested in checking it out. And I was like, this is spam. There's no way. This is like really them calling me back. Like nobody actually keeps your resume on file. But I was like, no, it wasn't spam. And so I went in for the interview and I ended up getting the job offer. So I didn't start at the NFL until October of the year I graduated, October of 2016. But I basically say that I was working there since out of college because I only really did stay at the NHL for a couple of months. But yeah, I mean, like, again, one of those situations where like there's an obstacle in your way, but if you really want something, like keep working towards it. And of course, I tried to be very respectful and I did all my thank yous and my follow ups and all of that to all the people who interviewed me at the NFL. And I guess it paid off because I ended up working there.
How long were you there? Kind of, how many years were you there? And what were kind of your different shifts and different positions? And was it kind of what you expected from the beginning? I'm sure there was just a lot of different things that happened to you while you were there.
Yeah. So I was in the same department for the entirety of my time there. I know if people are looking at my LinkedIn, it looks a little weird, but that's because the department rebranded about halfway, maybe like 2 or 3 years into my time there. But I was there for 7 years. I was in what is now called the player operations department, which sits underneath football ops. So not in marketing. I know people are like, oh, you worked in marketing. I did not work in marketing. But, when I got this opportunity to join the team, I knew I'd be working with players. And I was like, this is perfect. I get to work with professional athletes. This is actually the entire dream that I've been hoping for with working in professional sports. I wore a bunch of different hats throughout my time there. So when I first started, there was only 6 people on the team. By the time I left, there was 25, I wanna say. So over the course of those 7 years, like, the department grew significantly. First started working most directly with, like, the NFL Players Association and agents on booking player appearances, processing their appearance contracts and things along those lines, booking the logistics for their appearances and things like that. Then I ended up shifting into more of a player communications role, which essentially meant like I was overseeing our newsletter that went out to players. I was overseeing, the website data. Like we built a portal, like a website portal specifically for current players, free agents, and former players. And I was part of the team that worked with the vendor who was building out that website and managing the content on the site and things like that. And then a couple of years into that, I shifted again more to a content role, which involved me overseeing a podcast. We launched a podcast. We I was overseeing some of our social media handles and the content that was going out on them, specifically for former players. We had to handle NFL legends just for former players and what they're doing after their careers, and youth football. I also sometimes was dabbling in supporting the officiating handle, but that was definitely not my wheelhouse. That was someone else's wheelhouse. But then also doing interviews, documentary style interviews, helping with some content shoots just in general for the social team or branding or whatever. So really kind of like stretched across the board. I was crazy because I also like loved learning. And so in addition to my role within player ops, always looked for opportunities in other departments because I was like, I'll be better at my job if I know what everybody else does. So I did some side work with our club business development team. Essentially, what I was doing with them is going to different stadiums on game day and being like a secret shopper on game day, where I would evaluate like how the stadium experience was, how the parking was, how like the audio in the stadium was, like all that stuff. And then I would like put together a report and send it to the team. And then in addition to that, I also worked part time with the broadcasting department during the season, and I would help them screen games. And essentially, like there are certain like rules and regulations on what ads can run and when and where they could be shown and all of that stuff. And so, I got paid a little extra to do those things, but I also got to learn a ton. So I know that was a long winded answer, but I really just did so much in that role. And I'm so grateful for the opportunities because it exposed me to so much, which is, I think, essentially what led me to choosing law school.
Really so cool to hear. One, just as a sports fan, because it's kind of like what you were saying before of like, you don't always think about, I can work in a corporate job for the actual league. It's not just teams. Like there's this whole other side of this industry too. And it's just really cool to hear and understand how many different projects and teams that you touched. Was there ever a moment, in this span where you kind of just stopped for a second and were like, whoa, this is insane. How did this come about? How did I get here? I know you spoke also just about, your family background. I'm sure your parents must have been like extremely proud of you and your family being proud of you. Was there a specific moment where you're just like, whoa, like what is going on here? This is crazy.
Yeah, I honestly think it was probably my first Super Bowl that I worked. That was Super Bowl down in Houston, the Pats Falcons 28-3 game. So I had just started working at the NFL in October, and I didn't know if I was going to be working Super Bowl. Not everybody does work Super Bowl. Not everybody who works Super Bowl gets tickets to go to the game. So I didn't really know what that was going to look like, but I got to go to Super Bowl, work Super Bowl, and I got 2 tickets to bring my parents. My dad and my stepmom. My mom doesn't fly, but yeah, I got tickets to bring my parents to the first Super Bowl I worked just a couple of months after I graduated. That doesn't happen anymore. They changed the rules about that, so I got very lucky. But it was one of those moments when, because I was working the game, but at some point during the game, I had like downtime. I was able to go visit them in their seats. And that was probably the coolest moment because my dad was like, I cannot believe we're here right now. I'm like, I can't believe I'm here right now. And so like it was just this like my dad, my parents, they've done so much for me my whole life. And that was a moment where I'm like, I can finally say I've been able to do something for you. I brought you here. You wouldn't be here if I didn't bring you here. And like that was a really wow, holy crap. Like I did it. Like I'm here. I'm at the Super Bowl. Like that was the moment.
It's such a cool moment, and I think it's also there's like this transition all of a sudden when you get older, and I don't want to say necessarily that you start taking care of your parents because for different people there's different kind of stages of life, and maybe sometimes you're
Mhm.
more involved in your parents' life, and maybe for other people a little bit less involved. There is this kind of like transition where you start doing things for your parents and kind of doing nice things for them and trying to treat them a little bit, and that's
Mhm.
just an amazing story. So after this period, you gotta kind of help me understand this. You do something which is, I'd say, pretty unorthodox, and decide to change things up and go back to school. You go to the University of Michigan, where you are right now, and
Mhm.
study law. Maybe kind of take us through this decision, the pros and the cons that you were kind of thinking about at the time, and ultimately what led to this.
I know people will tell me I'm crazy. Like, how could I give up one of the coolest jobs in the world? And, part of me is a little crazy, I think. But what happened really is I loved the team that I was working on. I loved getting to work with players. I got to travel a ton. Like I said, I got to go to a ton of Super Bowls, more Super Bowls than most people would ever imagine. Meet players that, like, you name somebody, I probably have met them. I've really been exposed to so much, but I got to this point, truthfully, where I had turned 26 over COVID. And I'm like, all right, now I'm entering the back half of my 20s. And what does like my forever role look like? And when I was honest with myself, that's when I started to realize maybe a transition makes sense. I was traveling a ton, and over COVID, all the traveling stopped. And I really liked staying put. I mean, don't get me wrong, in my 20s, I was like, send me everywhere. I went to London. I went to, I think I've been to 24 out of the 30 NFL stadiums. Like, I've been all over the place. And I loved that in my 20s. But as I was getting a little older, I was like, is this going to be sustainable for the life that I personally want to live? And I want to be a mom. I want to settle down. And I was just like, can I see myself doing that and being happy with it? Like, some people can do it and they can find the balance and, they're totally okay with it. But for me, when I grew up with my mom home 24/7 because my mom didn't work. And so for me, I was like, I know I'm always going to work, but I do want to get very close to that experience for my kids, like being available, being there for the little things, being there to pick them up from, I don't know, birthday parties and stuff like that. Like, I want to be around. So that was first and foremost. I was like, okay, maybe the traveling needs to chill a little bit. And there are roles in the NFL that don't require you to travel as much. The other thing is I started to be very curious about working on the revenue generating side. So, working with players, we were a money spender, not a money maker. Of course, there were obvious benefits to supporting players. That's why our department was able to grow so much because clearly the team owner started to see the benefit that we brought to their players and to the league. But at the same time, we weren't part of the big business decisions that were driving the bottom line. As somebody who is so nosy and curious and loves all that stuff, I really was, I think long term, I'd love to work on the revenue generating side. And that's when I really started exploring what does that look like and how can I get to that side when I'm so far in on the other side. And so I just started talking to a ton of people. And, I love school. I always was considering going back to school, but I didn't know if that was going to be part time, if it was going to be an MBA, what it was going to actually be. And truthfully, the more that I talked to people, I would have loved to pivot internally and just go straight to the business development department. But I was told, like, if I was going to go there full time, I was a senior manager at the time and I managed a team of people. And they were like, well, you've never worked in BD before. So, like, you wouldn't be coming in as a senior manager. And I'm like, that makes sense. But I'm also not necessarily sure if I want to take a title cut, if I want to take a pay cut, and then externally, I wasn't qualified for those jobs externally. So, any bites that I was getting for other jobs, they were similar to what I was doing, but not as cool as what I was doing. So I'm like, why am I going to leave for another company that's not as good as the one that I'm at? So I was very lost for a long time, and it was a weird place because that was my dream job. And I was like, why am I like feeling this like sense of this itch to go do something else? Like, this is what I wanted my whole life. And I think that's kind of the curse of getting your dream job out of college is, when you've been doing it for a while, like sometimes things change. And it's like I worked to get here and then I got it. And now I'm like, okay, but now what? So long story short, I ended up talking to enough people where I had a very candid conversation with somebody who was C-suite at the league office at the time. And she was like, have you thought about law school? And I was like, no, why would I go to law school? Like, I don't want to do trial work and I'm old. So, no, I don't want to go to law school. And she was like, all right, well, time out. Like, first of all, you don't have to do trial work if you go to law school. There are other areas of law. And for me, again, first gen, I watch Suits. Harvey Specter does both corporate and litigation. I thought that's what everybody did. Clearly, I was wrong. I've learned that litigation is a separate sector. There's the litigators, there's the transactional attorneys, and then there's obviously you could do public interest, you could do academia, like all that stuff. But my whole life, I was like, oh, I want to be a lawyer. Like I'd have to do both, and I don't want to go to trial. So there you go. Do your research. But she kind of tipped me off to that. And then she said something to me that I never thought about before. She's like, also, just because you go to law school doesn't mean you have to be a practicing attorney forever. And I was like, well, then why would I go to law school? And she looks at me and she goes, Melissa, if you want to be a leader, female leader in sports, and she's an attorney, so she knows this, but working in a business role, she was like, people will take you way more seriously the second you tell them you're a lawyer. And something just clicked in me where I was like, I'm going to law school. That's it. You've convinced me. I don't have to do litigation and I don't even have to be an attorney forever. And people are going to take me more seriously. Done. And so I went down this rabbit hole of looking at, all these like senior level leaders in the sports side and the Fortune 500 company side and realized there are a lot of people in business roles and high level business roles who have a legal background. When you think about it, it makes sense because you're like, if you have, some like business and legal knowledge, you're able to make really strategic and efficient decisions from a leadership perspective. And so I was like, we're going to law school. Now I got to take the LSAT. That's really what tipped it off for me.
Crazy transition, but I mean, everything you just described totally makes sense, and a lot of moments
Mhm.
there where it's also you got kind of good counsel from the people around you and the people you work with, which is really nice. You get to Michigan. This has been, I'm sure, a really interesting couple of years, kind of getting back into the mindset of being a student. Has it been kind of funny, like just to kind of be in class, be with students of, different ages, I'm sure, and just to kind of, go, I'd say a little bit backwards maybe, but to go forwards again in the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And I should have kind of clarified my dream job is to like lead an NFL team or like be C-suite at like a sports entity. So that's why law school felt like the missing link in getting there. So my new dream job, I should say, because you're allowed to change your mind. But yeah, I mean, as a sports girl, former college athlete, former NFL employee, you can't pick a better school than Michigan, right? Like this was just, I was decided to be Michigan and one other school. And in hindsight, I'm like, what was I even deciding between? This was the obvious fit. But yeah, it was weird. It was weird transitioning back to student life. Law school in general is very different than undergrad too, because you basically have one test for each class and that's your grade. You have a final exam and that's it. But I will say the one thing that was the weirdest is how much free time I had because I was used to being a college athlete, having my schedule stretched in every way, shape, or form. I was used to working a very demanding job at the NFL. And then all of a sudden I'm here at law school and I have like class 4 days a week and like randomly sporadically throughout the week. Like it's not like I have like, oh, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. class. Like it would be like, oh, one day I'd have class that starts at 2. And the next day I'd have class that starts at 10, but be done by 12. It almost threw me off. Like it threw me off to have so much free time because I was so used to having my days like just filled to the gills and just getting in the swing of being in an academic setting took a second. I'm not going to lie. Like I remember, and I joke about this, and I remember first day of con law, I was like, can we just like start with like the 3 branches of government real quick? Can we just like go over that? Yeah. But I would remind myself that everyone's in law school for the first time, whether they just came from undergrad or whether they took 7 years off like me. No one's done law school before. So, you're kind of all going through a similar transition in that sense. But it was great. It's really nice being my own boss. Like I could talk to you in the middle of my Monday. And it's just like, I don't have to get any approval to do it. It's been, and it also, I will say, I'm a pretty youthful spirit, I would like to say. And this was, a kind of like a college 2.0 opportunity for me. I went to NYU for undergrad. So very different vibe than Michigan. I was in a city school. I'm obviously now on a traditional college campus with Big Ten sports. And so I loved it. I was like, I get to, I get the best of both worlds. I get to experience city school and being a college athlete, but also experiencing a traditional college campus in the Midwest with like I did not miss any home games. Actually, I missed one for a wedding, but that was not my fault. But I did not miss any home games. I like truly have leaned into the Michigan experience and I think it's been great. I mean, like you can probably tell I'm so smiley. It's somebody told me it's like, oh, law school like cured your depression.
Probably very different law school experience than other people. It's given you this like new youthful energy, whereas other people are like, kind of slowly getting back to the other side of it, which is really funny.
Yes. And that's why I say I'm a big advocate in people working before law school. If for no other reason, like I think there's a lot of benefits, but the biggest one is you will appreciate being a student again and you will see the forest through the trees. Like I don't get caught up in the little things. Okay, if I, didn't get the class I wanted this semester, or if I didn't get the grade I was expecting, or whatever, if I don't love my post grad job in Big Law, that's fine. That's not the end goal. This is a means to an end, and I'm going to enjoy the most of it. I'm going to make the most of it and enjoy it while I'm here. And I think that anybody who's worked before, especially for more than a couple of years, come back to school and you're like, oh my God, being a student is the best thing in the entire world. So how could you not love it?
Totally. It's a crazy story, and I think it's a good note to all of us that, like, when you speak to, business leaders and different people that you look up to, they never really say, "Okay, I hit my max of everything I wanted to learn in my life," right? Like, they never say, "Well, I've that's it. I got nothing left to do." The people that continue to strive for great things are just students of life, and they continue learning. So really just, like, applause to you to having that mindset, and it's a great lesson for us all.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And it became one of those things too where what I had at the NFL was great and it was certain, but what I wanted was very uncertain and it was going to be a risk. But I always tried to come back to what am I going to regret more? Am I going to regret leaving my job to go to law school, or am I going to regret staying in my job and not going to law school? And that's kind of just how I approach my life in general. I'm very big in my yes era these days because I don't want to ever look back and be like, I should have just did it. I should have just did it. I here now, being in my last semester of law school, I can say with 100% confidence, this was the best decision I could have ever made.
Yeah, there's a great book by, Daniel Pink, and he has a book called The Power of Regret. And he
Um,
interviews all these people, like, on the second half of their life and kind of asking them, different things that they regret. And I can imagine that if we went to that book of your life and skipped all the way to page whatever, and, we'd asked you, what was one thing you regret? And you said, okay, I never got the chance to go to law school, or not even law school, but really once you figured out that thing that you wanted to do post NFL, of really kind of starting a new chapter and finding something else out about you in your professional career, it's really just awesome that you took that. So kudos to you.
no, I had a really great support system. It could not have been done had I not had the support of my friends and my family. So I'm very fortunate that they were kind of behind me the whole time. The only thing my dad said was, law school's great, but who's paying for it? I'm like, don't worry, I got it. So, but I appreciate that.
We were speaking also, like, a little bit before, just about kind of like interpersonal skills, things for the workforce and networking and skills today in the world of AI. I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you was, you mentioned the importance of advocating for yourself. Maybe you could just kind of touch on that for a second, on, best ways that people early in their career can do that when they imagine this sort of path that they want to go on for where they're looking to go in their career, or maybe they're not exactly sure how to approach their managers or kind of speak in a way that's not showing themselves off, but just making sure they're on the right track. What advice do you have to give to people to kind of really advocate in the right way for themselves?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, so I should have mentioned this before, but when I took my job at the NHL, or sorry, at the NFL, I was giving up a full time job at the NHL. I was full time, salaried, benefits, paid time off, the whole thing. The job offer I got from the NFL was hourly wage, no paid time off, no benefits, and on a 1 year contract. I think the first thing that's really important is setting attainable goals. Like, sure, you can have your North Star, your pie in the sky goal that you're shooting for, but in order to get there, you need to have smaller, attainable goals that will keep you motivated to keep moving forward. And so, my first attainable goal when I started my job at the NFL is I told myself, I'm giving myself 1 year in this hourly wage job. And like, then I need to be hired full time. And if it's not at the NFL, then that's fine. But I need to be hired full time somewhere after a year. And the NFL was pretty open with me. They're like, oh, if you do a good job, like we could extend your contract. But I'm like, I don't want to extend my contract. I want to be a full time employee. Like, went to NYU as a college athlete. Like I know what I'm capable of doing, and I want to be a full time employee. So I was very open about that goal with my hiring managers from the start. And I wasn't rude about it. I just would tell them, I'm here to bust my ass and do whatever I need to do to convince you guys that I deserve a full time role here. And maybe I said it a little bit gentler way. I would follow up on it every 3 months. I would, have a review with I would seek the review. I wouldn't wait for my bosses to want to talk to me. I would set up time with them being like, "Hey, I want to do a progress check. How am I doing? What can I be doing better? What else can I be taking on? Like where are my areas of opportunity? What where are my strengths? Like things like that." And I would do that literally every 3 months. And I would remind them, my goal is to be hired full time by next October. Like I want to do everything I can and I know that there's some things that are out of your control, but that's still my goal. And I did that again every 3 months. And so they were very aware of where my head was at and also knew that I was willing to take on more. And I know that this is a balance between overworking, but also setting boundaries. I'm a big believer that if you're entry level and you're trying to make an impression, you should be willing to do whatever. Like, truthfully, you want to build your reputation. The time where you can start to set boundaries and pull back is a couple years in when you've earned your stripes and you've proven yourself and you've built a reputation. I mean, of course, there are certain boundaries that need to be respected in general, but when it comes to building your reputation, like, you shouldn't be saying no to anything that comes your way. You're not necessarily in a position to be saying no. You don't know enough about what that opportunity might lead you to say no and to turn it down. So there's that. And I would also volunteer to do stuff. Whenever something would come up, I would be like, "Hey, do we have somebody on that project already? Can I jump in? Can I just listen in? Like, if you don't need more hands involved in the project, can I just like join the meeting? Can I like learn what's going on?" And then on top of that, I mentioned I started to really reach out to other people in different departments because I'm like, I want to learn what you guys do. Tell me what you do. And so I started to build relationships with people outside of my little department circle. And that also helped me build a reputation because now not just the 6 people I worked with knew who I was. It was all these other people. So that when we were doing cross collaborations and projects, some people would start coming to me before they would go to like the right person in my department because I was the one that, knew them. I think that advocating for yourself is just being very clear about what your goals and your expectations are, explaining and making it very clear that you're willing to do whatever it takes to get to that next step. And then also building a really strong reputation for yourself. Because if you have 10 people in your corner saying that you deserve the next step, it's going to be very hard for a superior to say no to that versus somebody who's a little bit more reserved and quiet. Nobody really knows who they are, the work that they do, and they might be qualified for the promotion, but they're not the squeaky wheel. Does that make sense? Like, you kind of have to be the squeaky wheel a little bit.
This is super powerful. And I think like for anyone listening right now that is kind of in that entry level role or just getting started and trying to think, how do I get to the next level? How do I keep going? Like these are really super simple, actionable things that you could be doing that, a lot of people just don't think about these things. They don't think of like the natural things that you could be doing to make those connections with other teams, to really have that really direct interpersonal relationship with the boss sometimes. So it's really great advice. And it kind of leads into my next question for you, which I think this was one of the first clips I saw from your socials that really got me excited about having a conversation with you, which is advice for networking. You gave, I think, a really important piece of advice for networking of, understanding who you're speaking to and asking them, about themselves. And I liked what you said also about like people like to talk about themselves, of course. So maybe you could kind of just go a little bit deeper into advice for networking, maybe why some people have this negative connotation about it, and just kind of like some simple approaches when trying to kind of branch out. And especially for folks that aren't necessarily so extroverted naturally and kind of have a hard time getting out there.
Yeah. So I think networking just has developed this really negative connotation, like you said. It just seems like the word itself seems so stiff and so formal. And I just don't think that that's how networking is in reality. Like, to me, networking similar to building friendships, but at a professional level. And so I would consider you and I have networked at this point because we've talked and you know my story and I know your story. And, maybe next time, like, I'll interview you for your podcast. But I don't think that it needs to be this like transactional relationship. Like, it should genuinely be, hi, I'm interested in your path and your story and what you learned throughout your process. And then when you can invite somebody to give you advice, now they feel really important. And now they're like, whoa, they like want my advice. Like, I'll give them my advice. And then now that person who has just given you advice will want their advice to work. And so they're going to want to help you get to the next step because they're like, oh, I just gave this person advice. It better work. Otherwise, what's wrong with me that I don't have like good advice? And I don't think it needs to be a scary thing. And truthfully, I also think the big misconception is that networking needs to always be this formal phone call or this formal coffee chat. No, when you have your initial conversation with somebody, of course, like, you should talk to them because that's the whole point. But to stay in touch and to stay top of mind, like, you don't always need to try to schedule a call. First of all, people are too busy for that. If you're reaching out to somebody who's in like a manager or mid-level or even a senior level position, that person is also probably getting reached out to by other people. And so if every person who reaches out to them asks for a 30-minute phone call, like, person's not even gonna have time to do their own job. So my suggestion is always just find ways to stay top of mind. I send little notes, emails, text messages, LinkedIn messages, whatever, of things that remind me of a certain person. So, for example, I worked at in-house at a private equity firm between my 1L and my 2L summer. The general counsel that I worked for is also a managing director, and he's a big Michigan fan. He's a big sports fan. And so whenever I see something like related to sports and or Michigan, I'll literally send him a link in an email, be like, "Oh, what do you think of this?" And he'll get back to me. And sometimes he's very lawyer. He doesn't like to put things in writing, but he'll be like, "Call me. I want to talk about this." And so like then we'll have like we'll be talking about something that's not work. Like, that's the other thing too, is like, if you can find a way to talk about something, they of course learn about their path, learn about their role, but if you can get to know them as a person, that means that like you are building a much stronger bond with that person, a much stronger rapport than when you're just talking about what they do for work. Like, that person wants to be seen as somebody more than just an employee at this particular company. And the other thing is, like, when the same person who inspired me to go to law school, like, recently got another job. And I saw it and I was like, obviously I have to congratulate her, and not on LinkedIn, like, not like commenting on her new post on LinkedIn. I sent her a text and I was like, this is so awesome. And I was like, I made it personal. I was like, you inspired me to go to law school, and like, it's great to see, like, you're moving up and towards your ultimate goal or whatever. And, she was very thankful for me at least acknowledging and reaching out to her about that stuff. So I think that networking doesn't have to be this huge time commitment, this transactional, awkward conversation. Like, treat it as if you were talking to, maybe a friend that's like a couple years older than you. What advice would you give me? Like, what do you think I should be doing better? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? And like, also, by the way, I saw this and it made me think of you. So here you go. Like, I don't know. That's the way that I've approached it. And I've built some really awesome relationships because of that approach.
So you've touched a lot a bit, different moments in your life. And I want to kind of get a little more personal for a second. I know you mentioned that you were a first gen student, grew up, parents divorced at a certain point, and just someone who was just always kind of motivated from a young age. What was a specific challenging moment for you, in your life, if you could kind of pinpoint one? And how did you kind of get past that moment?
I mean, there's been a lot. So I'm trying to think of one that's maybe a little bit more recent. I would probably say the LSAT was really hard because I had committed to going to law school. I now had told people about it. And I was like, people had high expectations. They knew I worked at the NFL. They knew I was a good college, like a great college athlete. So there were these high expectations of where I was going to end up going to law school and how I was going to do on the LSAT. And the first time I took it, I really did not do as well as not even close to as well as I wanted to. I mean, I know it was a fine score, and I'm not going to even talk about the score because I don't want to offend anybody, but I was really disappointed in my first LSAT take. And I was like, really? Like, and I was, again, I think I had another humbling lesson. I was arrogant going into it because I had traditionally done well in school and traditionally done well on standardized tests. And so I was like, no, this is not going to work. Like, I can't have this LSAT score. So I took it again and I got 2 or 3 points higher, and it wasn't, again, nearly as good as I was hoping for. And so I had to explain that, I had initially planned on going to law school fall of 2022, but my LSAT score was not nearly ready for the schools that I was interested in. And so having to admit I'm not quite there yet, I have to take it a third time. It's going to bump my application cycle back a year. That was really shitty. I know I shouldn't have felt embarrassed, but it was a little embarrassing for me. And I just told myself, though, I could apply with these scores and go to a school that I'm not excited to go to. Or I could wait and I can go to the schools that I'm very excited to go to, and decided that waiting was not the worst thing. Getting another year of work experience at the NFL was not the worst thing. So I did the LSAT 3 times to get the score that I wanted. And I had to wait a year essentially before, like, to apply during the cycle that my stats were ready for. And that was humbling. That was very, very humbling. So, that's probably the most recent example, I would say. Outside of that, like, there are many challenges I've encountered in my life. My path is not straight. And honestly, if it was straight, like, there would be something wrong with that, because that would mean I wasn't pushing myself hard enough. So I just kind of like stuck to my values and what I knew I could bring to the table and just not accept anything less than that when I was pursuing this next step.
Okay, well, we are getting near the end of our conversation. Are you okay with doing a quick rapid fire session?
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Let's do it. That's fun.
Okay, cool. So, first, your favorite movie,
Ooh, Interstellar.
um, a book that you love.
I think the first one that's coming to mind is Barbarians at the Gate. It's a book about the start of private equity. And I'm usually not into like, nonfiction like that, but it was very insightful and helped me a lot going into my summer job at the private equity firm and also in Big Law. Other than that, I am a Harry Potter nerd. I love all the Harry Potter books.
Okay, well, I'll have to put that book on my list, and I'm with you on the
Mhm.
Harry Potter front. Someone you look up to.
Definitely my dad. He is a huge inspiration to me and kind of showed me that, you can really achieve what you want to achieve.
A place, I know you mentioned you've been to a lot of different places, but a place you want to travel to that you haven't been to yet.
Ooh, Japan. I want to go to Japan so badly. That's like top of my list. I love Japanese food. I am a huge anime fan. I love fashion. I love everything about it. I want to go to Japan so badly.
Okay, I'm not sure if you're actually allowed to answer this. I think you can, but your favorite sports team.
I could totally answer this. Like, all right, well, I grew up as a Giants fan for football, but the Yankees. So I actually was baseball over football for most of my life because my dad and my uncle had season tickets to the old Yankee Stadium. So we would go to Yankee games all the time when I was little. I had my name up on the board for my birthday one year. Like, yeah, big Yankee fan. So and also Derek Jeter is technically a Michigan guy. And A Rod's I think daughter goes here now. Go Yanks.
Okay, you mentioned also like you've met tons of players, obviously, over your career so far. Who is your favorite sports player that you've met with?
Ooh, Peanut Tillman for sure. I don't even know why I hesitated with that. He is amazing. He played for the Bears. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Peanut, but he was one of our podcast hosts. So I got to know him very well. And he is just a phenomenal guy. He's just a good person, so smart, and just a fantastic person to be around.
So, final question for you as we kind of gear towards the end of the conversation for today. What is the most generous act someone has done for you in your career? I know you've worked with a lot of people, different managers, different teams. What is the most generous act someone has done for you in your career?
I would probably say my old boss at the NFL, she was always in my corner and always pushing me for promotions and raises and taking on new challenges and putting me in situations where I would get exposure. But truthfully, when I was applying to law school, I was so nervous about telling her because I knew how much, like, she had supported me throughout my time at the NFL. But she was like the most understanding and the first person to be like, you're going to be amazing. We're going to get you to the schools you want to go to. And she wrote me a letter of recommendation. And, she and I have still kept in touch, to this day. I've seen her a bunch of times since I've started here at Michigan. And, just having her support throughout this whole process has meant the world to me because especially like I said, I was nervous to tell her. I didn't want her to think that I was like abandoning her team or ungrateful for the things that she had done for me. And her just kind of putting all of that aside and to this day will always be like, oh, I'll introduce you to this person. I'll introduce you to that person. You should come with me to this event and like do all this stuff. And like she doesn't have to do any of that. I don't even work for her anymore. And it's been phenomenal.
Just to kind of close out, what is the best place for people to follow your content and maybe just give us a trailer and a preview of what's up ahead for you?
Oh, yeah. So if anybody wants to follow me and just hear about my journey, or I try to share like tips that have worked for me throughout law school and working and all that stuff. And I'll be sharing some stuff about studying for the bar and all of that. My handle on both TikTok and Instagram is Melissa after 30. So feel free to follow me there. I finish out my last semester of law school. I start to study for the bar exam, which I'm taking over the summer. And then I start big law in the fall. So I'm very excited about that. But yeah, so if anybody wants to follow along, Instagram and TikTok are probably the best way to find me.
Well, we'll definitely put Melissa's links in the comments following this episode. And Melissa, just, thank you so much for joining today. For me, my goal with this is to speak to people that I admire, that I can learn from. And I think all the listeners who tuned into today will definitely do that and learn more about what's not in the resume with you. So, Melissa, thanks so much for joining today and good luck with what's ahead.
Thanks so much, Jordan. This was awesome.